unaware that his first 4 stabs at providing evidence for the existence of God were miserable failures. From his CD set, 10 Proofs for the Existence of God, Christian radio talk show host and apologist Bob Duco thinks he can offer a 5th proof for his God through
basic logic, common sense, and reasoning.
He then thinks he can give 3 simple examples of how logic, common sense, and reasoning can argue for the existence of his God, and that if anyone tries to argue with him about these 3 simple examples, they aren't being logical. How's that for poisoning the well? At any rate, he starts off,
my first example is this. How many of you have seen an image of the Egyptian Sphinx? Are you open to the possibility, if you're an atheist, are you open to the possibility that no one carved that Egyptian Sphinx, but instead it just coincidentally looks that way from the wind and the sand and erosion cutting into the rock that happened to coincidentally create the image of that Egyptian Sphinx?
I don't know about Bob, but this sounds awfully familiar. It conjures up images of toothpicks being arranged to spell out someone's name on a sidewalk somewhere. Didn't we deal with this already in part 4? Why yes. Yes, we did. But what's funny is how he tries to trap the atheist by asking,
so are you open to the possibility of sand and wind carving that Sphinx instead of an intelligence? Yes or no?
Well, no. Not of something like the Sphinx, for which we have documented evidence that it was carved by the Egyptians. But what about these structures? Did they require an intelligence? Or just the wind, rain, sand, snow, ice? Seems some of these apologists must not get outside much to enjoy the great works of nature. I'm actually more amazed by what natural forces can do with no guiding intelligence, actually, merely relying on the natural laws of physics. Anyway, we've already been down this road before. Next.
Here's another example you can use. Just look at a portrait hanging on the wall, maybe the Mona Lisa or just any kind of portrait at all, and ask your atheist friend, are you open to the possibility that no one painted that portrait?
Okay, this is just the same argument repackaged in a painting this time, instead of a sculpture or a bunch of toothpicks. Is there anything else creationists and apologists might have in their bag of tricks? I mean, seriously, what's next? Paley's old pocket watch?
Now, sometimes atheists will say, well, give me enough time plus chance and anything can happen. So, you know, the universe 15 billion years old, that's a long time. That combined with chance means that anything is possible. I submit to you that's not true. Let me give you a simple example for this. Take an alarm clock and disassemble the alarm clock down to its smallest component. Scoop them all up, dump them in a nice big metal coffee can, and then start shaking the can. Think about it now. How many billions of years until that alarm clock happens to coincidentally come together, reform itself?
Yeah, we need to let that soak in a minute. I seriously was not expecting him to go there. I mean, he charges people for these pearls of wisdom. Not quite a pocket watch, but an alarm clock. My, how original. Has any creationist or apologist ever heard of something called natural selection? Let me explain how it works using something as inappropriate as Duco's alarm clock. Crudely speaking, the parts of biological evolution, like the parts of an alarm clock, are alleles, individual variations in genes found in the makeup of all living things. With every new creature born, these parts can get mixed up, like the clock parts in a coffee can. For those who understand biological evolution, I understand this is a horrible analogy, but you've got to work with what the apologist gives you, no matter how inappropriate it is, so please forgive me. At any rate, natural selection works on these parts by selecting which is the most fit for a given circumstance. So, for example, If an animal grows a certain color coat in an environment where that color gives the creature a survival advantage, then that animal will likely survive longer than one of his fellows who doesn't have this same color coat, and this newly colored fellow will be able to pass along his genes for this coat color to his descendants. Over time, that particular environment will naturally select for animals with this new color of coat if this color grants a survival advantage. In a similar way, to use Duco's crude example, if natural selection could work on alarm clock parts, then in the process of shaking the coffee can, a particularly favorable configuration forms. Say, for example, a minute hand lands on a clock face, and that configuration confers an advantage for alarm clockness, then that configuration will be retained into the next generation, or shaking of the coffee can. Sometime later, if the hour hand lands on the clock face and that confers an advantage for the alarm clock, then that too will be retained, and so forth and so on until you get your alarm clock. It's not a random, chance-driven process that starts from square one every time the coffee can is shaken. However, and it's important to note this, evolution and natural selection do not plan on building anything with a goal in mind, like starting out with random pieces of metal with an aim to build an alarm clock sometime in the future. The results of evolution can be said to be random, in the sense that animals like rabbits and kangaroos were in no sense the goal of these creatures' ancestors. But the process of evolution is not. It's right there in the name, selection. Selection is never something that is random. So what was Duco's grand finale? What was his final third example of logic, common sense, and reason that proves the existence of God?
Now, I will also say, sometimes people will say to me, and I'm sure they say to you too, I don't see God. I mean, if I don't see God, I don't believe in Him.
Well, I guess we won't be getting to that third example, but move on to something new. Okay, so we atheists sometimes challenge theists to physically show us their God. Trot them out. Give us a Polaroid, a DNA sample, something. But they always fail. So what's Duco's excuse for this failure?
Well, that's not logical either, because of simple cause and effect. For example, look outside right now and you see the leaves blowing in the wind. You don't see the wind, do you? Yet you believe the wind is there. Why do you believe the wind is there when you don't see the wind?
We measure the wind with instruments. We can tell you what makes up the wind, the components such as nitrogen, oxygen, water vapor. We can explain how high and low pressure systems work to move these components from one place to another, and why when they encounter obstacles such as leaves or flags, why they interact in a cause and effect relationship the way they do. Can theists offer the same sort of evidence for their God? No, of course not, which is why these so-called proofs fail so miserably with us atheists.